I'm Stephanie with Gaming America, and I'm here today with Sascha Paruk, who joins us as the managing editor of Sports Betting Time. How are you, Sascha?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. We have a couple of questions for you today based on some things going on in the sports betting world and especially with the NBA. But the first question is about what the sort of journey has been with Sports Betting Time since the website started in 2012, but PASPA wasn't overturned until 2018.
Yeah, so I joined in 2014, and it's safe to say that things were very different back then. We were a pretty small sort of sports media startup, is how I would describe us. It was about six people working out of a two-bedroom apartment, and we catered largely to an audience that was not based in the United States. So we've always been a sports betting information and analytics site, so a site that was sort of detailing the sports betting odds that existed. And then we've always had writers who analyze those odds and sort of indicate where they see value. So it's the site itself has sort of maintained that framework the whole time, but the audience that we have been writing towards has obviously changed. And so we were not always part of XL Media PLC. And then as the sort of legalization trend started to sweep across the United States, I was not involved in this sort of process, but I believe the powers that be at XL recognized Sports Betting Dime as an authority in this space, and saw a good opportunity for to sort of bring us into their portfolio, and really at that point in time alter the focus of Sports Betting Time to be a lot more aimed at an American audience.
So the mission is largely the same, but the audience has just grown year after year.
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate.
Great. And we wanted to ask as well how the legalization of sports betting has changed how not only the fans interact with league drafts, but also athletes, journalists, and analysts.
Yeah, so from an SBD standpoint, legalization has created a lot more content for us when it comes to, in particular, the NFL draft, but also the NBA draft, NHL draft to some extent. We do have a Canadian presence. I live in Canada. The MLB draft less so. It's much less of an event as the other three. But when you're talking about like our coverage of the NFL draft over the years has grown, and it's grown commensurate with the betting markets and the type of props that are being offered by sportsbooks. So the more things that DraftKings and FanDuel are giving to bettors to wager on at the NFL draft, the more we are going to both report what those things are and analyze where we think the sort of value lies. So from a sort of journalistic standpoint, the legalization has just created a massive swath of content for us to cover when it comes to the drafts. For fans, the obvious one is you can have a much larger stake in the draft than you did previously. Before legalization, when you're watching the draft, you're paying attention to who your team drafts, and often if you're like me, not much else. But at this point in time, given the number of things that you can wager on at the NFL draft in particular, but also the NBA, you can have a stake in every pick out there. Now, it is worth mentioning that sportsbooks are very good at mitigating their own risk. And so the limits on the draft props are always, at least I think always, going to be lower than the limits that they're going to give bettors on a standard NFL Sunday. At FanDuel right now, you can go and bet on which team will draft Bronny James in the 2024 NBA draft, but you are not going to be allowed to wager more than $30 on that.
Sure.
So it's been obviously the way that fans are interacting with league drafts at this point in time is drastically different than what it looked like 5 years ago. But at the same point in time, sportsbooks recognize that this is one area where it's conceivable that the bettor is going to have an informational advantage over them, which is very rare. And they take the necessary precautions to make sure that it doesn't end up in bankruptcy.
And do you think they're checking your sites or maybe the informational and analytical sites more than their sportsbook to find out how to bet? Do you see increase in your website traffic from this?
Yeah, yes, we do. We have seen over the years, we have something that we call an NFL draft tracker, and it um, aggregates the odds to the main thing is who's going to be the number one pick in the draft. And so that is a betting market that is offered at FanDuel, at DraftKings, at BetMGM, at Caesars, at Barstool, at any number of legal North American sportsbooks. And so what our trackers do is basically average out all the odds that are being offered and display them in a graph and say, and show that over time. This is what the average was on this date. This is what the average was on this date, and you sort of follow it like a little line graph. And the amount of traffic that a page like that got in 2016 just absolutely pales in comparison to the amount of traffic it got in 2023. And it's pretty clear that the reason why people are coming to it now, at least to me, it's clear, is because it's something that they can actually want to wager on themselves.
That makes sense. And as far as providing graphs and providing odds to bettors, how does Sports Betting Dime make sure you may remain neutral in this process?
Um, not So I'm not fully sure that I understand that question. Like we are not a sports book.
Sure.
There have been times in the past where we have created odds like for fun. Just we've seen a market where it wasn't actually something that was being offered by sports books that you could bet on. We did this a lot with the Super Bowl in years past. Because like the Super Bowl is known for fun props, but the limit there is your imagination. So there were times in the past where we sort of came up with our own odds and offered and put them out into the world, but we're very clear like these are just this is what we think the odds would be if this was a market that was available to bet on. We are not a sports book. We can't take your money. We're not offering these for you to wager on. So like when it comes to presenting the odds that exist, the sort of the dynamic I was describing with our odds tracker is like we're collecting as much information as possible and displaying it to you. It is like it's an entirely neutral, like research based process. We don't have any stake in the matter. We're just trying to give you the information that is there and aggregating it from as many sort of sources as possible to give bettors the most accurate depiction. And then the other sort of half of what SBD does, like there is the informational side of it, but there is also the analysis side of it. And we have a team of writers that we're confident in, that are highly vetted, who will provide their opinion on where the best betting value lies. And that inherently is never going to be a neutral process. We value their opinion and we want them to share their opinion. And I hope that answers your question to some extent. But
It
sort
does,
of,
it does. You
the,
provide
the,
all the facts and figures you can and a little bit of the fun as well, just to keep it light.
yeah, and like I wouldn't even describe it as fun. We provide the best analysis that we can of what's available in the marketplace to wager on. And we want people to be thinking critically for themselves. We want people to research every bet that they make, but we also want to have this talented team of writers that we have putting their analysis, their research out into the world for people to consume and help them in their betting journey.
Great. And back to the subject of neutrality, there was a sort of complicated situation possibly with the NBA draft recently, where a sports book may have gotten some analyst information, it might not have been as neutral as it could have been. Can you give us some backgrounds about that?
I don't have any more information than you would on that front. It's a very delicate situation.
Sure.
I agree with you there. And I do think that it might be wise for like when sports betting started to be legalized across the United States, it was always very clear that this is going to be a highly regulated activity. And when you have that sort of imbalance in power, that imbalance in knowledge that could potentially exist between the sports book and the bettors, I do think it's incumbent on the regulators to be putting very strict controls in place that like the way that insider trading is protected against and the way that it is illegal and penalized. I do think that that type of framework needs to exist, but that's going to be incumbent on the regulators to make sure that the industry that they have legalized and that they have created for the people of their constituency is not drastically unfair to them. So they have allowed these corporate entities whose number one interest is making money, who need to make money to survive, to operate in this space, in this industry. And they have to be aware that those entities are going to, I'm not going to say function unscrupulously, but they're going to do what they can to make money within the confines of the regulations of the law. And so, as I was saying before, it's really important that the regulators in each state, because this is being done piecemeal, it's not federal, the regulators in each state to make sure that there are very strong controls in place to protect every stakeholder that's going to be involved in this.
Very good points. And I know we had the MLB draft recently as well. Do you think that was possibly a bit less unscrupulous? Do you think there was some neutrality there that the NBA could have looked toward for guidance?
I think that MLB has a very big advantage when it comes to their draft in that I'm not going to say nobody cares, but way fewer care. And so like Victor Wembanyama, Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, these guys are celebrities before they ever set foot on an NBA court. Paul Skeens, Dylan Cruz. I think if you go to Louisiana, they're minor celebrities, but there's not the same sort of rush from a national standpoint to predict what is going to happen with them. So yes, I do think the MLB did a better job of remaining neutral, of sort of ensuring that unequal information wasn't disseminated to certain parties. But at the same point in time, I do think that they had a massive advantage of there being far fewer eyes on them.
So it's really going to rely on both the regulators in each area and the popularity of the sport as well, then.
Yes, the more popular a sport, the more betting interest there is going to be. And the more betting interest there is going to be, then the stronger the controls need to be, basically.
Okay. And what do you think of the education for athletes and fans in each sport has been like? Do you think there have been some gaps? Do you think they've been handling things well in sports like basketball, baseball, hockey, any of them?
No, but I also think that it was almost impossible for them to do so. Gambling is an inherently risky activity. And when you look at our society and the way that we tend to deal with inherently risky activities like drug and alcohol consumption, like sex education, we address these things. We try to address these things from an early age, and we try to educate people when they're young. And the better that you can educate people about the risks from an early age, the better those people are going to be equipped as they go forward and become adults to not fall into the traps that inherently risky activity presents. When you legalize something like sports betting in half of the country in between the years of 2018 and 2023, you are then presenting to an uneducated population this brand new inherently risky activity. And that is a risky thing to do. I'm not saying it was the wrong thing to do, but I'm also saying that it was a very difficult framework in which to do things perfectly safely. You know, if you are creating some idealistic society in which sports betting is a part of it, the way that you approach education is very different from the way that you approach it when you are throwing it into an existing society. And so I like, from the sounds of it, the NFL did they made concerted efforts to tell their players, here's what the rules are. You cannot bet on NFL games. You cannot place a bet inside a facility. And they presented that information to everyone in the league. And at the same point in time, it either people didn't hear it, people didn't understand it, or people ignored it. And the lattermost of those, people ignoring it, is a risk that you're going to run. There are always going to be people who, you tell them, don't don't steal, it carries this punishment, and they see the benefits, the pros outweighing the cons, the rewards outweighing the risks. Um, I wasn't privy to any of the sort of information sessions and how the information was presented. So I can't speak to the first 2 points that I was making, whether there was sort of enough information and whether it was presented well. But obviously, like they did make efforts, and I think the only way to deal with this properly is to continue to do so, is to continue to educate. Like I come from a legal background, and one of the things that I took away from the like criminal sentencing courses that I took is that punishments, strict punishments, things like mandatory minimums, are not the deterrent that the general public thinks that they're going to be. They don't result in people curtailing their illegal and risky activity. It needs to be paired with really robust and effective education. And so I don't, I'm not saying that the NFL should increase or decrease punishments. Punishments, fines, suspensions need to be a part of this, but they also need to be a part of it in conjunction
Balanced education.
with yeah, and really really forceful and vigorous education.
Okay. The last question we have for you was about whether you think sports books and media companies are sort of trying to mirror each other and put out similar products these days, which may include education on how to bet, which may include education on odds. We have things like sports books coming up with live TV offerings. We have things like uh, media companies offering odds. And who do you think that's better for, the industry or the person betting?
I think it depends on how cooperative they're being with each other. Um, Anytime that there is a lack of competition, it's going to be bad for the consumer. At the same point in time, if you are getting the same 5,000 betting markets at 6 different sports books, the ability for the bettor to line shop and potentially arbitrage is going to increase. So I think it's too early to say whether this is going to be more beneficial for sportsbooks or more beneficial for bettors. Um, but I think it has the potential to go either way.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Is there
Yeah,
anything else you
but
wanted to add?
no. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.